Welcome to the Canny Conversations podcast, Conversations with a Cause, with social entrepreneur Safaraz Ali.
Hello and welcome to another Canny Conversation with a Cause. Conversations that we'll hope will captivate your curiosity cannily. And Saf, welcome.
Good, thank you.
So tell us a little bit about what you've been doing.
Work.
and is that a good thing, or do you think? I mean, work.
Yeah.
Do you think?
I've been to. It's actually wedding season.
I know you've talked a lot in the past stuff about work-life balance
or work-life choice.
Work-life choice.
Yeah.
But do you agree that there are circumstances in which it's actually a good idea to sort of get away completely?
Absolutely.
And do something completely different?
Absolutely.
But you find that difficult to do you?
At times to switch off, but different. It's the variety, isn't it? It's not doing one thing. So I'm lucky enough the fact that I'm able to switch and do different things. Sometimes I had two interviews actually this week, so that was quite good. One for a publication and one for a podcast, another podcast. So interesting. So it's having that variety, being in a position where you have choice and you're doing things because you have the choice rather than having no choice. So
you're almost a serial podcaster. Is that going a bit too far?
No, I wouldn't say I'm a serial podcaster, but I am looking at doing another podcast outside our Canny Conversations podcast, but that's specifically for the further education sector, and I've been working on that in the background. So this is, obviously we talk about, things that really interest us here, leadership, business, and most people can dip in and dip out. But the FE podcast is specifically aimed at the further education profession, the further education sector. It is specifically about, what that industry is talking about, themes, and it's slightly different to this, where I'm actually the host and the sort of the interviewer really, and so I have an opportunity to talk to people. So it's really in preparation for that. So I've been working on that.
Are you somebody that if you're not working, you feel guilty?
I find it hard at the moment to say watch a bit of television without maybe having something, in terms of doing something else. Whether it's scribbling notes on a pad, or whether it's having my laptop open and working in the background to a certain level. I've been able to do that. I've gone to, as I said, cinema and watched films and without doing anything else. But it's being able to focus and stay in the room. And I think, I've got to work on it. I've got to focus on, and if I'm in the room, I want to be in the room. So, that quality time rather than my mind wandering off. So my children are talking to me. I need to focus and listen exactly what they're saying, and that's for family members as well. So
I think a lot of people that work hard don't recognise that the body and the mind is something that needs rest and recuperation in order to perform well. And it's very, very difficult. And I know I find it difficult, and I suspect you might find it even more difficult than I am to actually make the distinction. But, you sometimes think, I'm being lazy, where there is a distinction between laziness and, genuinely taking time out so that you can rest and recover and perform better. And that's a decision, which brings us on to the topic of today's Canny Conversation, which is about decision-making. We've all heard the saying that, we decide in haste and we repent at leisure. But we've also heard equally the saying that he who hesitates is lost. And both of them can be correct in certain set of circumstances. And both of them can equally be wrong. The title of this particular episode is Take Your Time. And you chose that title, Saf. So how important is it to take your time when reaching a decision?
I think we need to realise at times where, when we're being emotive, when we're emotional, when potentially we need to sleep on it. You're talking about resting and so forth. And last time we spoke a little bit about books or podcasts on various topics. So one of the things I'm more conscious about is the good quality sleep that I have, and different levels of sleep, and how sleep is quite a complicated affair, but it's much needed, and going into sort of REM sleep and different levels of sleep, and the fact that if you're lucky to have a good quality of sleep overnight, and it helps you with life, it helps you with business, and it helps you with how we make decisions. And so from my perspective, sleep is a thing that I would say I've taken it for granted, and I thought, if I'm sleeping, I'm wasting my time. I've given that more time now in terms of my life, and I've planned my sleep, and I've planned how I get to sleep and so forth. So I'm switching off. We all know about devices, and giving the mind sort of triggers the fact that now it is bedtime, and having a routine pattern. So for me, from my perspective, it's those sort of habits that I've formed. And again, it's not just about the sleep, but it's also about the rest. It's also getting into a position where I'm not triggered happy with an email. So if reading it, rereading it, digesting it. Previously, I've been known about sending emails at sort of stupid o'clock, really, at 2 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning. So I tend not to use my laptop at certain hours. And if I am using the laptop, it's going to be for creative work. It's going to be for doing a little bit of creative writing, either writing in terms of for a book or a publication, or writing in terms of for enjoyment. So I have changed my habits in terms of what I do, and I tend to sort of think over some decisions, reflect on it. What I also find is, this last bit I'll say, and then I'll pass the mic back to you if I may. But is at times verbalizing or vocally talking about the issue to somebody who's a confidant, somebody who I can trust, because what they'll do is they'll give me some clarity of thought, and that hopefully clarity of thought leads to clarity on execution, which then hopefully leads to better decisions.
I don't want to lose the thread in terms of, we're talking about sleep and we've talked about books, which is quite nicely brings together. I don't know if you're familiar with a chap called Dr. Steve Peters. Steve Peters is a medical man. He's a clinical psychiatrist. He's worked in some of the medical units like Broadmoor, worked with some very disturbed people. He's also provided advice to the British Olympic cycling team. He was an advisor at one time to the Liverpool Football Club, and he's written a number of books, but one book that I would heartily recommend to anybody to read. If they only ever read one book in their lifetime, read Dr. Steve Peters' The Chimp Paradox, which is a splendid book, and I think ought to be on the national curriculum along with Shakespeare. But one of to digress, one of the things that Dr. Peters says in that book, he says, unless you absolutely have to, never make a decision or never make an important decision between 10 o'clock in the evening and 8 o'clock in the morning, because the way the body's cycle is, that is a bad time to make decisions. Now, clearly, if you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you've got chest pains, you don't wait until 8 o'clock to ring the ambulance. But that's a situation where you have to make a decision during those hours. But I have to say, Saf, that the old adage, sleep on it, for me, as I get older and hopefully a bit wiser, I think that's very wise. I always try not to make difficult decisions between those hours. And I also try to make it a habit never to send or reply to a slightly awkward email or telephone call during that time. Is that something you subscribe to?
For me, that's the key here. It's the haste email. It's the haste response. You start saying, and you decide in haste, repent in leisure. And I've sent emails where, I've probably been a little bit too trigger happy. And then not only do you find later on there's upteen spelling mistakes, but the messages in him, even if it's nothing too serious, but there's spelling mistakes there. There's messages in terms of cleared and really, it could have waited, and it's just not the right thing. the best thing to do. So yeah, I think there's a time and a place for it. Yes, if there's an urgency to it, and if there's some element of it, and if you've got all the right information, but at times you're pressured to make decisions, even by team members, where they're asking you, or they want you to sort of really approve a decision. What you find is that you're better off asking questions as opposed to giving a sort of a decision on it. So yeah, definitely.
I want to really get a bit more into this decision making process.
Okay.
Because I think it's really absolutely important, because it's at the heart of leadership. The ability to make decisions, and most of the time, hopefully, to make the right decision, is absolutely at the heart of leadership. Some decisions are clear. I mean, if you're in a building and it's burning down and you've got a safe exit, you get out. That's pretty clear. I mean, there may be circumstances where it's more complicated because you've got loved ones you want to try and rescue, but generally that's a clear one. Sometimes the decisions are difficult because they're counterintuitive. If you're driving a car in the winter and you hit a patch of ice and you get into a skid, the natural thing to do is to hit the brakes. The worst thing to do is to hit the brakes. So that's counterintuitive. Most decisions involve a level of complexity, and most decisions involve some sort of compromise, because they are not black and white. Perhaps the most important thing about decision making is it is informed. You can never have too much information before you make a decision, right or wrong.
I think sometimes you can have too much information, but just going back to the points that you're making about we live in a world which is complex. I keep going back about, you and I have discussed this, but in reality we have discussed many of these things. But we live in a VUCA world, VUCA, VUCA. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that really, in a nutshell, explains sometimes that you think you know, but you don't. You've got some assumptions, but then they're not right. So there's uncertainty there. There's complexity there. There's ambiguity there, and it can be volatile. That's the environment we're in. So there can be some unknowns. There can be some complexities, some layers of information that we don't know. It can be uncertain as well. So there's certain things that can change, and all of these things are there, and you may have to make a decision bearing that in mind as well. Sometimes what we find is we're in a world where information is easy. Sometimes you have a lot of information, but it's getting to the chase. It's being able to find the right information. We have too much choice, and it's really being able to filter through and work out what's right, decipher the information and its impact. So it's about timely information, it's about reliable information, it's about having the picture behind the information as well, the context, the what-if analysis. It's that word that we've used many, many times, fit for purpose. And sometimes, is it, when you say yes or no, unfortunately, yes or no doesn't cut it. It is about fit for purpose. I've had team members where they say to you, tell me what you need to know. And you turn around and say, well, tell me what I should know. Where the onus is then on them to bring to the surface the right level of information. I think being able to communicate and being able to get that information across is absolutely vital. And I think putting it in some sort of sorting that out, putting it together, being able to explain it visually, being able to suggest solutions and so forth, and giving the narrative behind it.
I mean, the other point, of course, is that maybe you can never have too much information, but the truth is that we very often have to make decisions with incomplete information. We often have to make decisions when we don't have all the information, because that's the way of the world, isn't it?
I mean, this you find some people who are reluctant to make decisions because they feel that they don't have the information or they need to wait on something, and it's really understanding what that impact is going to be. So at times analysis paralysis comes in. You're waiting on information. You want really somebody else to make the decision for you. And you find that what are they waiting for, and how is that going to impact? And yes, it is about reducing your risk. And business a lot of the time is now about risk reduction It's not about gambling. It's not really about entrepreneurship. Is people have said it's a lot of it's about risk, but it's about risk reduction and understanding the risk, understanding the context of that, and it's the right level of information that we need without getting distracted, without getting too much. And what you find is when you've got that right level of information, you find that the decision makes itself. What I mean by that is that it becomes a bit obvious. And we all rally around and say, actually, what, that is the right thing to do because it's there, it's apparent. And when you're in that position, that's when it just seems a little bit easy. And it's like in any professional, they make it look easy. And if you've got the right information, and if your team and your departments can give you the right information, then it becomes seamless, it becomes easy. And then you're using data. You've got integrity in that data. You can trust that data. That will lead on to, hopefully, better decisions and the right decisions.
I mean, the other thing, of course, is that by the very nature of things, information tends not to be static. Information changes, continually. And we have to make decisions very often in an environment where a set of information that we're working on might change in the next hour, it might change in the next minute, it might change in the next few seconds, which brings me on to something called the OODA loop. And in case our listener is thinking that the OODA loop is something that you might have bought for Toys for Us for a 5-year-old, it's actually not. What do you know about the OODA loop, Saf?
Well, you and I spoke about this again. I mean, I keep going back. Listeners are going to be thinking these are very interesting conversations that you and I have. But, I came across this Radio 4 program by Matthew Syed, and we've made reference to Matthew Syed previously. If anybody can search Matthew Syed and his OODA loop and program on BBC Sounds, it's definitely worth listening. And OODA loop is something back from the World War II, United States Air Force, a chap called John Boyd, and he does a technique which is a little bit about distraction, really. And, it talks about observe, orient, decide, and act. And it is a military technique, which some of these are military techniques. And the concept is about distracting your opponent and then moving to an area where you're limiting choice for them, but you've got more choice for yourself in a nutshell. There's a whole story around it, and there's a whole concept in terms of that. It's something I would say is not that common in business at this moment in time. It's not something which I would say is in most people's vocabulary, but it is something which, again, goes into our vocabulary of sort of understanding information, understanding data. And we've all learned that data and information are two different things. And a lot of people use the words interchangeably, but it's really understanding what is data, what is information, what needs to be done to the data to make it information. A lot of that is about relevancy. Relevancy is a key part here. Filtering what needs to be filtered, and getting to a position where you can do something with that data in a fast-paced environment.
And one of the things, of course, with the OODA loop, which, as you say, is developed for the military, it is one of the important elements is to make the decision, because by making a decision relatively quickly, you tend to put the opponent off balance and tend to take the initiative. So to some extent, if you spend too long balancing this and that and taking all the information into account, it don't do you a lot of good if your plane has been shot down while you're doing that. So in business, do you think sometimes that it's perhaps important to make a decision, because it can give you a level of market advantage, because you're creating a situation in which your competitor perhaps has to respond to what you've done?
One of the books I was listening to a little while back is by a lady quite well known, Arianna Huffington, and she's the original founder of the Huffington Post. If you just type her name into YouTube, you'll see her talking quite a lot about decision making and how she's able to thrive in this world and getting into a position where she lets things flow. gets information, lets things flow. And there's a book which I believe is called Thrive. And this book again talks about sleep, and we've talked about sleep earlier on, but it's a lot more than that. It's about really being able to have a sort of a call to arms within your organization, which redefines how we look at things. And sometimes what we do is we as individuals clap and praise people who come across as being quite sure of themselves. Yeah. And, the whole confidence element of it. And people who make a decision, and then when the facts change, stick to the original decision. And sometimes when your facts change, your decision needs to be looked at. And in politics, they keep talking about, doing U-turns and various other things, and changing your mind on something is negatively portrayed. And again, we need to, as an organization or within your own organization. I mean, we can't change society, but in our own businesses, what we can do is allow people to change their mind. Allow people to say, based on what I had, I made a decision. But, I have more information now, so I'm in a better position. I can make a better, more informed decision. And maybe at the time that was right, based on what I had. Maybe it was wrong. But now, based on this is what I'm thinking.
You made this point to me before, and I think it's a very good one, that, often politicians, for example, get castigated because, you've made a U-turn, and sometimes it's actually the right thing to make a U-turn, because if information and circumstances change, then perhaps the right thing is to change the decision. There was a British Prime Minister in the 1950s and early 1960s, not that I remember him, but a chap called Harold Macmillan. And somebody said, "Look, what's with you, Harold?" He said, "You're like going, you're like somebody who's driving a car. You touch the brakes one minute, you put the accelerator on the next, you do a U-turn." And Macmillan said, "Well, actually, that's what you have to do in a busy street. And the world is a bit like a busy street. You have to respond to changing circumstances." So am I right, Saf, in thinking that you're somebody who actually does say, well, if the circumstances change, don't be ashamed of changing your mind?
I mean, I try and do that myself, to be frank with you. I tell people that I've changed my mind on this. My view has changed. And that may not be even with additional information. That may be just me analysing the same thing and rethinking about it and changing my mind. And I don't want to give the impression that, I'm changing my mind every moment. There are occasions where I have changed my mind, and I'm happy to say so. And I'm nurturing a culture where it's okay to do so. It's not a bad thing to do so. And it doesn't show weakness. It just shows the fact that, you've moved on. Your thinking, and I think if politicians can do that more often, we will find, we're no longer in sort of camps as such. We're in a position where we are looking at things slightly differently to try and do the right thing.
What's your take on on turning to other people? I mean, for advice. I mean, people you trust and you think have got experience. To what extent do you think asking others helps, or can there be circumstances where that just makes something even more cloudy and difficult, bearing in mind that ultimately advisors advise and you decide?
I think it's really understanding. Again, I think you've hit the nail on the head there in terms of how you make decisions. On occasions, it's talking it out helps. Just the process of being able to either jot your thoughts on in writing or being able to portray it to somebody else helps. And what you find is that just that process of going through that helps you make the right decision. And that's a big thing in itself. It's not about, necessarily what the other person might say or the sort of nuggets of gold or wisdom that they may share with you. It is just the fact that it fine-tunes your thinking, fine-tunes your thought process, and enables you to really understand what you're saying. So, if you can simplify something, then you at least you understand it. And for you to be able to get somebody else's viewpoint, you've got to somehow simplify it. And in certain occasions where you're talking to somebody who isn't from your industry or from your sector, then one of the key things is that you have to simplify it in a way where somebody outside your sector, the person that you're talking to, can understand it. And if you can do that, if you can simplify it, then the first thing is you understand it. If you understand it and if you've spoken about it, you let the mind sort of think about it, and you'll find that it helps you regardless of what the other person, what nuggets of wisdom that the other person says. That's the first thing. So for me, in terms of seeking advice, yes, it's a good thing, but what you find is that it helps you yourself come up with better decision. It's not always about what the other person says. That's how I tend to look at, when I'm going out and talking to people and seeking advice. It's not just about what that person says.
I think the important thing is, in my life, I've been on both sides of the fence. If you're the decision maker and you turn to other people for advice, then that's fine. But I think ultimately you have to accept that you own the decision and you can't blame it on them. Equally, and I've been in this position in life, and to some extent, in the professional work that we do, I'm in this role as an advisor. And I think the important thing that people who are advisors have to recognise is that ultimately they don't make the decision, and they have to accept that some advice will be taken and sometimes it will not.
And that can be a funny one, because if you go to people and get advice and they start giving you advice to say this is the way, and you don't accept it, you don't take, your situation changes. You should never be in a position where you get upset about that. Decisions are the be-all, end-all in terms of the right decision, and we are the sum of the decisions we've made and the actions we've taken. So ultimately, it really is about decision making, or sometimes to make the decision not to do something as opposed to do something. But whatever it is, it's, you've made a conscious decision. It's having clarity in this word. I love this word, clarity, and clarity of thought. Which leads then clarity of execution. You can't be emotional when you make these decisions. You don't want to be making them in a rash environment, and you don't want to be making them in an environment where it's untimely as well. So timing, is everything, they say. So it's a combination of those, and then it's really the execution, isn't it? It's the execution of whatever your thoughts are, your planning is, and execution is the mother of all plans, as they say. So a combination of things. But
I was going to have to try and finish this episode off with some golden rules.
Okay,
but I think you've actually covered a lot.
Okay, go on. I'm interested in hearing your golden rules.
I was going to suggest there are 3 golden rules, but you've covered a number of them off. I think you've agreed that it's important to try to not make a decision when you're in an emotional state. Not always possible. I think we've already discussed the fact that it's probably, if at all possible, best not to make a decision when you're being deprived of sleep, or when between 10 and 8. And finally, and I think this is important, and I value your comment on this, when you've made a decision, you've presumably made that decision to the best of your ability, given the available information and given the circumstances in which you've had to make them. It's very important, isn't it, not to have recriminations. Not every decision that you make, not every decision that anybody makes is going to work out well. But having made the decision in good faith with the information available and in the circumstances, would you agree that it's very rarely helpful to recriminate? Yes, if the things haven't worked out well, then try and learn something. But would you agree with that?
Sometimes it's not the be-all, end-all. It's the consequences of that decision. And I think the impact of it is absolutely vital. Some of these things, you can sometimes you can change your mind on something and it has no impact and it has no bearing. And other times it's the consequence and the impact. We live in a world where, to be frank with you, we want to understand our risks. We want to prioritize our risks, and we've got to be in a position where, we make sense of the information that we have and decide on the appropriateness of it and, act accordingly.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. And I'm sure that some of the issues that we've discussed today I'm not sure, I know are covered in the Canny Bites books, which provide the basis of a lot of this series. We really do value what people think about what we're saying. We really do value feedback and any reaction that people have. And if they choose to subscribe and to like what they're hearing, then that's hugely appreciated. We're going to bring this canny conversation with a cause to a close now, and hope that people will join us again before too long. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this Canny Conversation with a Cause. These conversations are based upon the Canny Bites books by Safaraz Ali, available on Amazon. To find out more, go online and visit Saf's website, pathwaygroup.co.uk, or join him on social media. He can be contacted at safraz@pathwaygroup.co.uk.